Hi, Paul.
Hi,
Welcome to the
Fiona.
Dark Night of the Soul Unwrapped.
Thank you very much for having me.
Pleasure. So I thought we'd begin at the beginning, essentially. What was happening for you around the time or just before your dark night began?
I've been thinking about this a bit recently, and although it's not really a tidy sequence of events, I can kind of give you the lowdown on what was going on in my head. So I've been doing, well, for quite a few years, over a decade and a half, I've been doing plenty of spiritual work and going to meditation retreats and listening to teachers and doing a lot of different practices at home, experimenting. And at first, the feeling was just that the more I practiced, the kind of better things were getting. You know, I was getting more calm and centered and more peaceful. At some point, I really hit a big brick wall with it. And it was something along the lines of, because at the time I told myself I was looking for surrender, right? So I'm looking for surrender, but how can, if surrendering is this giving up of the personal selfhood, how the hell can the personal selfhood ever do that? How can it give itself up? You know, that's completely ridiculous. And when that penny dropped, I really went into quite a despondency for a while. Meditation stopped working. I lost interest, and all of the books in my library started to sound just like nothing, really empty words. And so that despondency was the beginning of the kind of crash that you describe in your book, which I hadn't realized that it wasn't just me going through it. That was so nice to find that it wasn't just me. Yeah, I don't know whether that answers your question there.
Yeah, I'm really struck by what you said about the fact that you were looking for surrender. Was that because of things that you'd read, or clearly there was some idea that that's where you should be headed?
Mm. And I suppose that's the terms my mind formulated it in. But yeah, um, probably influenced a great deal by a lot of the things that I've read in popular spirituality and non-duality, those kind of things. And I suppose if I'm honest, on another level, I did recognize that the being resistant wasn't serving me either. So being at war with my experience, in other words. So a big no to everything. No, I don't want this feeling. You know, I don't want to have to face this. So on some level, I did recognize that resistance was part of the problem, but then I also realized there's nothing I can really do about giving up the resistance. That doesn't make any sense. If part of the separate selfhood is that resistance, it can't give itself up.
Right.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you were kind of, I mean, this is my word, but a kind of sense of being squeezed between
Oh yeah.
the idea of between the resistance and this idea that you should be surrendering.
Yeah. Squeezed is a great way of describing it. It's, believe it or not, that's a mental image that I used to have a lot of that process. Yeah.
So you're being squeezed like this.
Yeah.
What happened next?
Well, it was very similar to what you've described, really, in the book. At first, it felt like falling into a pit of despair, but then it seemed like during that time, a kind of deeper peace than I'd felt would come out of nowhere, almost like I want to say like the biblical metaphors, like manna in the wilderness, manna from heaven, a bit like that. So in the middle of all that despair, I'd find bits of peace and depth, and the despondency didn't. After a while, it didn't feel like a mistake or even necessarily anything bad. There was like a background sense that this is okay, perhaps this is even good. Um, but I doubted myself many times and just thought this is what a crazy person would think and say. So I spent months just calling myself a crazy person. Yeah,
Hmm.
not being very nice to myself, particularly in that time.
I actually use the phrase manna from heaven
Yeah,
in the book
yeah.
to describe those moments, which certainly for me they're few and far between, but when they do come in, somehow in those moments things would make complete sense.
Oh, yeah, yeah. It always seems to me, I don't know whether this is actually how it is or just how it seems, but it always seems that that manner, whatever it um, is lined up to appear at the right time, where you would completely lose any hope. Then it kind of hooks you back in, doesn't let you get too far away. I think you use the metaphor of a dance somewhere in the book. It's very like that as well, isn't it?
Is there more that you'd say about what was happening in that time? As you say, you were in this falling into the despair. What else was happening in that space?
Everything in my outer life as well. So I think that's worth mentioning that I got really, really sick with ME, chronic fatigue. Ended up losing my job. Was living by myself at that point and spending most of my time alone every day, which I found difficult as a previously very sociable person. It, it's uncanny the way everything in my life fell apart at once there, outward and inward. And for the first time in my life, I just had no clear idea of direction. At one point, I would have said, yeah, but I can concentrate on spiritual work. I can move towards enlightenment, as I used to think in those days. And then that fell apart. I said to myself one day, I don't really believe in enlightenment anymore, at least not how it's described popularly. So I was left with no direction and no idea what to do for a long time.
I'd like to come back to enlightenment in a bit because I think
Yeah,
there's so much to be talked about that.
yeah,
But first of all, I think for me, there was something in being physically stopped by being ill was
yeah.
very much part of this process. And I have this sense that if I'd been able to keep going, I would have done.
Mm.
There was something about, just as for you, literally being stopped by there being no energy to do anything in any case. How was that for you?
I found it intensely difficult, really difficult. I used to put a lot of stock in physical exercise. I used to be a jogger or at the gym. I was one of those kind of crazy people who like to jog before work and stuff like that. I think a lot of my identity was based around it. Maybe that's why it had to go. But so that was the first thing, that I couldn't exercise anymore. And so I used to use exercise to lift my mood and control my mood. So that was gone. I could no longer control my mood. Um, Obviously, being a sociable person, that was gone. And the the kind of selfhood that comes through doing a job, having a role in the world. I think that's what I mean. I had no role in the world. I felt like I had no value to the world, and I felt that very wrongly, almost physically, kind of worthlessness or shame.
I think that sense of everything has to go is a really big part of this dark night unraveling. I mean, certainly it was for me, and finding ourselves, like you just said, with no role, with no sort of perceived external and often internal value. It seems that it can only really happen when it has all gone. What happened when you got to that place where, as you just described, everything had gone, including your role?
Mm. Um, I can only really use a metaphor I've heard you use before of a kind of bottomless pit, a kind of falling but not hitting a bottom, just falling and falling. And obviously, me telling it back in hindsight as a story, I'm putting quite a positive spin on it, but it really was I really did struggle to be positive around that time, and to put a brave face on. And I suppose what I found difficult is that, and people that love you, family and friends, will often try and intervene, and I can understand that they care about you. They'll try and in some way intervene, try this, try that, and I was unable to go along with that. I think you used the word violation before. It felt like a bit of a violation, or perhaps I got it into my head that it meant I wasn't trying hard enough. If I'm suffering, that means on some level I'm not trying hard enough. So it was a very lonely place, and I really struggled to make sense of it. Yeah, I started to make sense of it after reading your book, which came at the right time, so I was lucky for that.
Thank you. I mean, that's really great to know.
Mm.
You just were talking about the idea of being positive and putting
Yeah,
a brave face on it. For me, there was something about the giving up or the shedding of those sorts of ideas. And I think that's really difficult in this culture, isn't it? When there's such a, I think I referred to it as somewhere as, cult of positivity,
yeah.
where there's an expectation of,
Mm.
where it be that, in very simple terms, looking on the bright side, or in spiritual spaces, often the idea of being low vibration or high vibration and all of that stuff. I think there's
Mm-hmm.
something so shaming in that,
Yeah.
that when we find ourselves in these really, really difficult places, more shame is piled on top of what's already there.
Yeah, so when we're made to feel weak, we're made to feel negative. It's part of what our culture worships, isn't it? And or in many places around the world, that idea that it's almost like to be a good citizen, really. In the way it used to be like to work hard as a good citizen, we still have that, but also, and especially in Britain, maybe putting a brave face on to keep calm and carry on. Mustn't grumble.
I think that's I've not talked about this with anybody else in this context, but I think there's something that we almost take for granted as British people
Yeah,
around that idea of, you can be in the most awful of states, but if you bump into somebody and they ask how you are, the worst you'll say is like, "Oh, not bad."
yeah.
And of course, as we know, it's not necessarily a question of like telling the truth on that level to everybody that we bump into. But I think there is something in that, in terms of the culture around the notion that somehow it's just not really what we do.
And I've always thought that a lot of the small talk expressions we tell to each other are very telling as well. Like what you just said, not too bad,
Right.
or surviving, not too bad, mustn't grumble. They're all quite dark if you look at them closely, but they're quite normal for us, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. At what point what happened with that notion that you should be being positive and putting a brave face on it?
I think the more I tried to apply that and work at it, um, the more I felt like I was spinning out and hopeless. And I've just used the word violation. It just seemed like the more force I tried to apply in any direction, um, made things a million times worse or made me lose my balance. And that includes something I've asked you about. How much discipline should I use with meditation? Because that was part of the shaming for me. That a disciplined and a good disciplined human being does the meditational exercise however they feel. Doesn't matter how you feel. Get on the meditation cushion. So I had really drunk the Kool-Aid with that stuff big time. And at the same time, I was finding sitting down to meditate felt like this huge violation, this control response. I don't know if that sounds familiar to you.
I mean, it's certainly, I never had that kind of discipline to begin with. So my sequence was slightly different in that sense, that I felt pre-existing shame that I wasn't like that.
Yeah.
And so going into the dark night, there was sometimes a sense of, well, if you'd been better at ... then this wouldn't be happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what you just said is so important in terms of anything that feels like force or control or push
Mm. Mm.
is registered as such a violation. And yet the kind of messages that you were getting around that were to keep doing it.
Mm. Yeah, the word coercion just popped into my head while you were saying that. It
Hmm.
does feel like a form of coercion, or a kind of self coercion. Um, yeah, you know what? Like a lot of the things that I used to believe before the Dark Knight and after, that I just don't really recognize anymore, Fiona. I just don't
Yeah.
get it anymore. And this idea that there can be like a personal plan for salvation or enlightenment. And, I've even heard some people refer to it as success on the spiritual path, which blows my mind when I hear that now. Like it's you're an athlete training for a race and only the strongest survive. You'll get there if you're dedicated, disciplined, and work hard. And that stuff that I really did drink the Kool-Aid on. I really did believe all of that stuff deep down. Now, it doesn't make any sense to me at all. That stuff popped like a bubble for me.
That's so well put. I think that my experience was really similar. I sincerely believe that if I reach this place called enlightenment, that all would be good.
Yeah.
That would be the end of all pain and so on. And the same as you, all of that just crumbled. And I have no relationship to those sorts of ideas
Mm,
now. We were going to come back to enlightenment. I mean,
yeah.
what was it holding out for you before the dark night? What was your motivation, as it were, for all this trying, all this discipline?
There's been a background for a long time of spiritual seeking, really. I'm originally from an evangelical Christian church. Kind of fundamentalist, I suppose. And when I left that, I realized I couldn't be involved in that anymore. But the desire to seek a deeper meaning didn't go away. And through some of the books I read, that kind of seeking started to intensify. And I suppose I imagined that everything would just be taken away. So the background of anxiety and despair and unhappiness and all the seeking would just be taken away. The mythical idea of enlightenment, that I'd go in a state of bliss, become this amazing, perfect being, be a blessing on the earth, and I would have achieved something. I would have made myself through my efforts into an enlightened person. So that's what I mean by drinking the Kool-Aid, because I can't think in that way anymore. I just can't do it. Yeah. If anything, these days, I think if I was going to use the word enlightenment at all, probably wouldn't. But if anything, I think of it as more of a verb now. It's a kind of something we're either doing or we're not in any given moment. Um, that's about as far as I'll go with it.
Yeah, I could feel as you were describing that what you were seeking. First of all, there's just a sense of like both being really moved by that, but also pained. It's like that's so painful, isn't it, to want to become this other thing because it feels like this what we are in our current state is so, whatever word we put to that, so
Mm,
worthless or not enough or inadequate or
yeah.
whatever our conception is. And for me, one of the things about this notion was that it I think I perceived of it as sort of like the ultimate rung on the healing ladder.
Mm,
that once that was reached, then there was a completeness to that. And absolutely, as you were just saying, a sense that then I would have transcended all the shame, all of
Mm,
the other feelings, all the other pains, and become this thing which I think was really an ego ideal,
yeah,
essentially.
yeah,
And I think that's what it is for so many people, which is why I
mm,
think it sells so well.
yeah, yeah,
That fundamentally the idea of being this, being us just as we are right now,
mm,
with all of
mm,
our bits and pieces and stuff, is so deeply unacceptable on some level, both personal but
mm,
collectively too,
yeah,
right? And I think there's a real uh I'm not sure of the right word, but I think there's something very profound that happens when the idea of enlightenment as that disappears. That I think there's so much love in the falling apart of that. You started out talking about surrender. Was there some kind of surrender at some point, or did that morph into something else? Or
I think it's just come to mean something a bit different for me, Fiona. So nowadays, surrender is the willingness to be with my feelings, to welcome what comes up. So I think in those days I was using surrender as a kind of shield to not have to feel things. And I think we have to admit that a lot of modern teachings do kind of help you go into that space of believing that when a feeling comes up, oh no, it's a bad feeling, it's a feeling of despair. I'm going to witness it from a detached standpoint. Don't get involved, let it go. And that has its place. I'm not knocking that, but I think it can lead us down a kind of blind alley. And as I've just implied, I got to a point when I couldn't do that anymore. Um, so now it's feeling things. So when an emotion comes up, I want to feel it all the way through. Do you know what I mean?
absolutely, I mean, during the dark night, what happened to me sometimes, in amongst all of the struggle and the trying to move away from so-called bad feelings, was that there were times when I just simply couldn't do that. There was nothing in me that was capable of that. I surrendered to something sort of despite myself. And in those moments of really falling into something, there would inevitably be a movement that I couldn't possibly have foreseen
Oh yeah.
before that, right? So I had that experience a number of times, albeit sporadically,
Mm,
but enough to know that there was something in that. And in any case, my ability to keep things at a distance or to
mm,
do that kind of detaching, witnessing thing was, that wasn't available. And and now, and I've been thinking about it a lot recently because I've been starting to write a little bit about what it is to follow the thread of the movement that's happening within, that isn't something that we're doing, the
yeah, yeah.
movement that happens when we do start to feel things all the way through.
Mm,
And this idea that really that might start with being present in very simple terms, just
yeah,
being here and kind of available to our feelings. But that really the whole point is to come into relationship with what's here,
yeah,
whatever that relationship is. And so the idea that we would sort of somehow try and do this weird thing of holding ourselves apart from our own experience, including our feelings, starts to feel very sort of stilted
oh yeah,
and kind
yeah,
of weird,
yeah.
right?
Well, I mean, to me, increasingly, the image came to my mind is it Sisyphus rolling the boulder up the hill?
Yes.
Became more like that as it went on. Like I had, like I had a rock on my shoulders. Like this is exhausting trying to do this. Like with an inner emotion detection system. Oh no, it's another emotion. Gotta, do whatever it takes to rise above it. Exhausting, right?
Completely. What a
Yeah,
brilliant image.
yeah,
Because what comes to me is like at some point we just we have no choice but to let the boulder just roll over us, right? And and I think there's something, like you say, it's so exhausting continually trying to push that boulder up the hill.
yeah.
And to let it roll over us feels like we'll be annihilated.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And yet there's a profound relief in that too, right?
Unbelievable. Yeah. No, yeah, that's exactly what I found, and I can still remember the exact moment when I discovered that. Sat in my living room, trying to rise above all these emotions, and a kind of voice in my mind just said, "Sometimes there's no other option but just to suffer."
Mm.
So at that point, I let the rock go and kind of fell into what felt like an abyss of despair. But what I found there was relief at the same time and peace. I can just let myself feel it's okay. I can just feel these things all the way through.
I'm feeling a bit teary
Yeah.
hearing that. I think there's something so important in this. And we know what that experience is. We know what comes prior to that is so much fear,
Mm,
terror around the idea of being obliterated or annihilated or all of that. But I think there's a beauty in those moments and a kind of a beauty at being run over by the boulder because that is what's actually there,
mm,
right? And the reality is those feelings are here.
mm,
And certainly for me, there's something about connecting with that realness that makes so much difference.
yeah. It was quite a moment, although it sounds like a very dark moment. It wasn't. It was a very beautiful moment.
There's such paradox in this, isn't there? That in those moments of touching into things that we would be trying to move away from and that we're encouraged to move away from can be so beautiful. I can remember a similar experience with futility,
Mm,
like falling into this deep sense of futility and the kind of sort of vitality almost that came from that. Certainly, certainly a deep sense of groundedness that you can't get unless you go there.
yeah. I wonder how much of our life energy we expend rolling that boulder up the hill, and suddenly there's loads of energy to spare, isn't there, when we say, I'm not doing this anymore.
Yes. I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it, that you mentioned resistance earlier, and I really get that there's that kind of resistance. But I think there's also something in that no,
Mm,
like you just said, no, I'm not doing this anymore, or
mm,
no, like enough. Saying no to that old paradigm. I think the more that comes in a sense, the more we get our vitality back.
yeah, for sure.
And I know for me, there are ways in which that's still ongoing, right? That there are parts of the old patterns or the old energies knocking around that come up from time to time,
Mm,
and that the saying no to that, when we're not talking about not feeling things or
yeah.
refusing to feel,
Mm,
but there's something about almost taking a stand. Is that your experience?
yeah, it took that, and it's strange that it is a no, but it's also a yes, isn't it? You're also saying yes to yourself there.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. That I think that's really the key, isn't it? That
Mm, mm,
the no to that is yes to ourselves in such a deep way. Because I think a lot of that old patterning or that old structure developed to protect us or whatever that was, but also is fundamentally a no to the deeper part of ourselves.
Mm.
A kind of no, you can't be that. You have to
Yeah.
be this.
Yeah.
And of course, depending on our circumstances, we'll have that to a greater or lesser extent.
Mm. It seems to just have to be worn down or worn away, doesn't it? And so I don't. Perhaps the distinction I'm making between pre-Dark Knight and post perhaps is a little bit artificial. It's funny. I was thinking the other day, if I did go back in time to meet my younger self before all of that, would I tell him you're wasting your time? This isn't going to lead anywhere. And I think I would not. I think I would not. I think I would have closed down and become hopeless in a bad way if I'd have known that then. Do you see what I mean?
That is such a great question. I would feel a real sense of, I mean, I'm thinking about, the same question for me,
Yeah,
my younger self. I think I would feel deeply, I would really feel for her.
yeah,
There would be a real sense of like, oh, love, I can really see what you're doing to yourself.
yeah,
But yeah, to shut that down, I don't think I would either. Because there's something in that, you talked earlier about this desire to seek a deeper meaning.
mm,
And I think there's something so essential in that, right? It isn't that we're saying that searching or seeking is is wrong in any way,
yeah,
right? I mean, it might get sort of distracted or taken off into cul-de-sacs or,
mm,
but there is something. I hesitate to use the word right, but there is something correct in that, right? There
yeah,
is a
yeah.
deeper meaning to be found. What's your sense of that now?
The deeper meaning to be found in.
And the searching for that deeper
Oh, I
meaning.
see what you mean. Yeah, I just think I don't know. Well, this might even sound trite or formulaic, but I just think that every stage of the journey has its place, and I don't. It's difficult for me to see any of it as a mistake. Even my mistakes don't feel like mistakes really anymore. I don't know. I think what's happened with me that I didn't expect to happen was just a kind of trust in the process and in life, and um, something that I found absent from a lot of spiritual teachings and books. That grace. We're not an athlete training by ourselves. Yeah, lost the thread. I don't know if does that make sense.
It makes complete sense. Yeah, I think what you were just saying about grace and this sense of coming into connection with, yeah, some other, whether we call that divine or God or
Yeah.
whatever. I think that's where the trust comes in,
Mm.
that it isn't so much that we're trusting ourselves per se, as that we're trusting, it's like ourselves plus grace.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah. Mm.
and I really relate to what you say about none of it being a mistake,
Yeah.
including the things that at times have felt like the most appalling, crushing
Mm.
mistakes that we've been really ashamed of.
Mm.
That there's something in the mix with all of that brings us to this place of, I think, a profound willingness to be with what's here. And certainly I wouldn't have foreseen that going into the dark night, or even for the first couple of years, that that would actually be the biggest gift. This trust in the unfolding process and in the intelligence of that.
Yeah, and that's just such an important point that I think is missed out on so many discussions. I suppose I can see why it is, but I don't know whether that's the deeper meaning of the word faith. Really, just a trust in life, trust in the benevolence of life, and trusting in yourself. Um, because without that, we kind of feel very alone, don't we? Or we close down into cynicism. And yeah, for me, that's what faith means rather than belief in this or that doctrine. It's a trust to me.
Yeah, and just to be clear, we're not talking about the trust that life will go well,
Yeah,
right? This isn't really about getting what we want or avoiding bad things happening.
yeah.
So that we might still go through incredibly painful things, and yet there's a trust in what happens when we follow what's moving in us at any given time, even if in the moment that might look hopeless or we might be in despair, that there's a trust even in allowing for despair
Exactly. Yeah,
following that.
yeah,
And I think for me there's something in this process too about um I guess we could use the words evolving or maturing, that in a sense that whole enlightenment fantasy is is kind of immature, right? That will suddenly become this thing, this amazing thing. That there's a deepening into a far greater sense of maturity, I think, which is really, I suspect that's what humans are made to do in a sense. You know,
yeah.
that we do have the capacity to do that. Do you feel like that's been the case for you?
Well, I didn't know I had the capacity to do that. I would have said no. The Dark Knight really stretches your capacities, doesn't it? You at certain points you're like, I can't believe it's possible to feel all this and not die. I didn't know one human being could feel all this in one day. So you're stretched right out, and with that, perhaps that's what brought me to faith. You know that I can handle it. I'm going through all this, but I seem to be alive, and I'm just about functional. I can feed myself, and yeah, that's how it felt to me. I didn't know I had that capacity, but now I have a bit more of a trust in things. And like you say, it's not a Santa Claus attitude to life. I know that you're still going to have to go through a normal human being's life, but um, you trust yourself to be able to fall into the emotions and not get lost in them. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
you trust that you're going to come out.
And in the Dark Knight, I think part of that process is that precisely that we don't trust that we're going to survive it, right? That I can remember there was a period of time where I sincerely and genuinely thought that I wouldn't wake up most
Yeah,
mornings
yeah,
because, like you were saying, the pain just wouldn't be survivable. And yet we did, and I think the knowing of that over time starts to sort of, some kind of trust starts to seep in,
mm,
doesn't it? It isn't that we make a decision to trust, or but that it just starts to happen like that. And I think what you say about that stretching is so accurate, that
mm,
we couldn't have known that it was possible to feel so much pain, and yet, yeah, and yet we're surviving it.
mm. And at some point, there is a yielding, but it's not something that we do, or at least it's not something that I do. It just happened at certain points in the process. There's a spontaneous yielding. I mean, if you want to call that surrender, that's fair enough. But it felt more to me like I'll use that word yielding, and it's not something that I did. I didn't achieve yielding or surrender. At some point, it just happens. Yeah,
I love that. I can feel there's a so subtle distinction between yielding and surrender, right?
yeah,
Like the sense of sort of giving in yielding, and it feels less dramatic in a sense than surrender, with its connotations of defeat and
yeah.
loss and all of that. Yeah, that was very much my experience too. I think just that sense of yielding that wasn't, again, I mean, I would love to use that sentence you just said about not achieving yielding or
Yeah,
surrendering. I'd like that to sort of run through everything that we're saying about
yeah,
this.
yeah,
And I think that's such a different position or such a different stance in relation to our experience in life
yeah.
than than the old one that we were describing of sort of overcoming or getting out of. Or so what happened as you started to emerge out of the dark night?
Well, I will say that, like a lot of us, I still go through mini cycles of it. So I don't want to leave the impression that it was a one-time event and I came out of it a changed person and everything's great now, because that's just another version of the same myth, isn't it? More of
Completely.
the same mythology. So I still go through mini cycles of it now and then. But when I came out of the main cycle, I found myself ready to have a role in the world again, and I started to quite spontaneously, really, to realize I wanted to train as a therapist and to do that. So I did years training in that, and I'm grateful for that because it's given me a role in the world again. When during the dark night, I didn't really think that was possible for me. Um, so that's externally. In terms of internally, in the emergence, there was more. There was a lot more joy, and life inside was a bit quieter inside. There was a gratitude. Perhaps that's the word I'm groping for most of all. Actually, gratitude. For the first time in my life, I was grateful for having suffered. First time I'd ever felt that way. So the gratitude was significant. I can't. I'm groping for a better word or a sentence to describe it than that, and I can't seem to do it. I'd probably one of your poems would probably describe it better, but I can't seem to find the right word. But gratitude feels right. Just a big thank you for all this and for being carried, for being taken through this, and for having survived, and for being brought here.
Beautiful. I think that sense of being brought here and the gratitude for that is so much part of this
Yeah,
that it's hard to, I think it is really hard to articulate what that means in a sense, and how we could be grateful for so much suffering.
yeah,
And yet that that's absolutely the case,
mm,
right? That
mm,
that there is that. Now you have this role in life. How is what you've experienced interacting with that role?
mm. One thing that's puzzled me is when I am in kind of mini dark night cycles, when there is that kind of chipping away at my selfhood or that kind of burning, whatever it is. Do I feel a questioning myself? Do I able to be there to care for others? But it turns out there's. I think you said to me before. There's a big bandwidth. Yeah, there's more of a capacity to take care of others during the dark night than I would have thought, despite how. Sorry, there's a drill outside my house. I'm just
That's
going to
okay.
pause for a second. There's
It's
like a
sure.
road drill. Yeah, one second.
Yeah, okay. I can't hear it at
Okay,
all.
I think he's stopped now. Sorry about that for you.
That's okay. I
It's a
couldn't
noisy
actually
room.
hear it, so we'll see.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought.
All right.
What were we talking about? Oh, we were talking about the Dark Knight and then having a role as a therapist. Um, yeah, at first, when in a mini cycle such as the one I've described before, there was a point when I doubted I could be there for others because to a certain extent, during some of the Dark Knight cycles, it feels like I'm using all my energy to be there with myself, which sounds very selfish and self-centered, but that's, I think, part of what happens during that process. Um, I've not found that to be true, though, that I can't be there for others during that process. I think, in a way, it actually seems the opposite, that it opens the floodgates of compassion more, and makes me more present to what the person in front of me is going through, more able to understand them, and less inclined to use any kind of violent intervention, particularly if the person's going through a dark night process. The idea that I would try and do what therapists are supposed to do, some form of manipulation, will alter the way you're thinking, will alter your behavior. The idea of doing that, I just could not do that to someone in that process. So in a sense, I'm really grateful for it, that I'm able to identify with that suffering that people are going through.
Absolutely. And I think my experience is really similar, that in the main dark night, so to speak, I absolutely wasn't able to be with anybody, and like you had no role, having had a sort of helper, caring role prior to that. And I think it's absolutely necessary and natural that our sole focus at those times is on ourselves.
Yeah.
I don't think that is either selfishness or self-centeredness.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're being brought into ourselves in on every level in such a deep way.
Yeah.
And and yeah, I mean, same here. Those mini cycles continue in different ways. They've changed over time. And I think what you just said is so apt, that then there's less and less in us that is inclined to push or manipulate or change or
Mm.
fix
Yeah.
somebody else too. You know, we understand
Mm.
what that violation is because we've experienced it
Yeah.
ourselves in different ways. And honestly, I think that's one of the biggest gifts that we can give each other. That that sense of, it is completely okay with me that you are here like this just now. You know, that
Yeah.
sense of being in what I sometimes call the space of unconditionality, either with
Mm.
ourselves or with somebody else, is what allows things to move. I think that is what invites the grace in, so to
Mm.
speak.
Yeah.
And I don't think grace comes in when we're trying to sort of change or
Yeah.
fix or manage or control. And to hold or set up this space in which somebody else can be in that, I think is so important.
Yeah. And in all honesty, Fiona, I think if I hadn't gone through the dark night, part of me would have panicked when having a client like that. Somebody very deep in the underworld of suffering, somebody suffering extremely deeply. No intervention is going to help. You know, you're not going to do CBT work on their thoughts, or you're not going to. It's just, that's absurd. And quite honestly, if I hadn't gone through that level of suffering myself, I think I would have panicked. I don't think I would have known what to do. And you don't want to see a therapist that's panicked that you're suffering. That's not helpful either.
Me too. I don't think I would have given it my best shot.
Yeah,
And I mean, I wasn't a therapist, but I was in a different role working with
yeah,
people. I certainly would have given it my best shot. But yes, same here. And again, I think what a gift for the people who are finding their way to you, that you are able to be with people in that space without panicking. And yeah, same here, that I think there's something about being with somebody who knows, either because, say in my case, because they've read the book, or for you, you know, I think there's something that just people know, that we know the depth of what they're experiencing, albeit our different version of that, so it's not that we're saying it's an identical kind of suffering, but that we know our version of that.
It's very peculiar how the right people come along. Perhaps we all kind of know each other really on that level, because I've found that the right people come along. People in that process have come to me despite not knowing who I am, and I never wanted to. I think of my role as a form of service, but I never wanted to do any talking about spirituality. Do you know what I mean? Or I never wanted that, because I'm kind of a little bit bored of all that from early
Yeah.
on. Like, I've had enough of that. So I didn't particularly want to do that. But strangely, in some capacity with some of my clients, I found myself functioning in that role as a spiritual guide, and not quite unwillingly, but surprisingly, in a way that surprised me. Um, so that's interesting, the way that's lined up. It's not something I planned for or ever would plan for, but it's an honor to do that role. It's a big privilege and an honor. Yeah.
Hugely so. I mean, such a privilege. Thinking of people who write in it just now, who are listening to this, is there anything you'd like to share?
I think I would like to share that the giving up that you're so afraid of, there's something on the other side to catch you. When you fall down the pit, there's a nice fluffy mattress at the bottom and nice loving arms to catch you, and it's perfectly safe. And don't worry.
Paul, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thank you very much for a really interesting conversation.
Thank you. Bye now.
Bye.